Gender and sexual orientation are completely different. Gender is about presexuality, sexuality is necessary to procreate. The only connection between gender and sexuality is that it is the choice of the individual.
We're going to start the panel discussion. My name is Jericho, and I'm going to just pass this mic off to people so they can just introduce themselves with their name and gender pronouns. With the most recent event of the Orlando shooting, it can no longer be a surprise that toxic notions of hypermasculinity contribute to violence. Masculinity can be so fragile that gender non-specific items like toothbrushes, soap, and food can be marketed as for men only. Most times, men have to assert their manliness by rejecting anything feminine and prove themselves as a man. This mentality stems from the idea that things that are feminine is somehow weaker than things that are masculine. How have you seen concepts of femininity and masculinity manifest in the queer community, and how do you think we can shatter harmful notions of masculinity?
Looking at you, looking at you, looking at you, looking at you, you guys are redefining what masculinity is from where I came from. I've been on this earth for 50-some years, and the idea of masculinity has changed. And that's been contested through strong queer folks like yourselves who define what masculinity is, and lesbians who define what masculinity is. It challenges us. It is a social construct. We all agree that masculinity is a social construct, femininity is a social construct, and it's also associated with commercialism. You make manly toothpaste, manly toothbrush, manly underarm deodorant, and then we make the feminine underarm deodorant. We as consumers become responsible as well by buying into that. So we need to be aware, self-aware. Two people I want to acknowledge. One is George. Remember Uncle George? I don't know if you do, but George was the first Filipino-American activist in Chicago who self-declared that he was HIV and was dying of AIDS. In our community in the late 80s, when AIDS was so rampant, he was the only Filipino-American that stood and said, I am gay, I am Filipino, and I have AIDS. That, to me, was the most masculine thing in the idea of assertion as a man one could ever have done. He was, unfortunately, not supported by the Filipino-American community. He was not supported by the American community because, number one, he was gay. While we were fighting for gay rights, while we were fighting for, during the Reagan administration, of knowledge of AIDS is there and is rampant. One man in Chicago, George, who was also a member of Big, and this is where art is so powerful, defined what masculinity was for me. When the Orlando incident happened, this massacre happened, see, for many people, they don't realize that we as person of color, we as homosexuals, lesbians, transgender, we are constantly assaulted by mainstream society. Constantly, we live through it. It's like we just learn to dodge it, walk through it, lie through it with dignity, and we choose to act it out with dignity. I have so much respect for you organizers who have done this because you are defining what masculinity is and what femininity is. Look at you the way you look right now. You will get beaten up when I was growing up. But thank God for people like yourselves in those days who paved way, right? In New York, that started to pay rights. But also, we have to understand that in our culture in the Philippines, when I was growing up, we actually had an acceptance of what bakla is. We always made fun of baklas, but we never really had that much, I don't know, at least in my experience when I was growing up, we never had much experience with gay bashing. I don't know why. When I was there 6 years ago, and we were in a film shoot, and we went to the barangay, there was this young kid, he was 3 or 4, wearing nail polish and a dress, and everybody protected him in this small little barangay. How do I define masculinity in my 50s? It's so fluid. Masculinity comes from not being an aggressive, from aggression to nurturing, critical thinking, acceptance, talking about your feelings. There's this really wonderful documentary that I was watching while I was having wine this morning. And I was telling your Tito Juan Carlos, I said, damn, they're going to ask me about masculinity. I haven't been masculine since I came out. Then I realized I have been both masculine and feminine. I have been the true self that I have been since I came out.
So I personally am queer as well. I determine myself as asexual. And others would think okay, what the hell does that mean? And I was like, I don't know how to show you basically. It's just an identity that is part of me. But at the same time, I'm so much more. I'm Filipino, that's something. And sometimes I'm okay, do you feel the stereotype of a Filipino? What's that? Well, I'm going to be a nurse. But at the same time, that is something nursing. I don't understand why that has been a Filipino type of stereotype. For me, it's a sign of, or a dedication to helping those who need it. And for me, if that's fulfilling a stereotype, then I don't understand, because I think anyone who has values should never be stereotyped. They are regarded as the person you are, basically. And also, being female, even within the race of Filipinos, there's sometimes a stigma that Filipino women, they need to be feminine. But again, as you said, we're redefining what femininity and masculinity are. So, for me, I don't really care about dressing up. I just like to look nice today because I love going to Chicago dressed up. But sometimes I love wearing cargo shorts sometimes and sneakers and wear a baseball cap because my hair sometimes looks ratchet. But at the same time, just because I don't assert myself enough doesn't mean I'm weak, or femininity isn't a sign of weakness. And it's definitely and masculinity, I can be tough, but that doesn't just mean I'm masculine, that also means I'm feminine as well. All these things, they tie into what I hope people can do, and that is just accept people as they are. And so, I don't know if I'm answering your question very correctly, but just know that even with all these individual aspects that you think are essential, in the end, it's you who define yourself. You define yourself, and even though you feel obligated to carry out these characteristics that are expected out of you, the only person that should where was I going with this? Define yourself is, of course, you in the end. And overall, just if people are not gonna allow you to do that, just ignore them basically, because it's your life and no one else has any right to dictate what you are.
Given the prevalent stigmas presented within Christianity against queer communities, many LGBTQ youth have dealt with feelings of inferiority, shame, isolation, and violence. However, many queer folk have found solace in religion and have used it to process their identity and their relationship with God. How much has religion influenced your life, and how do you think we can create a more accepting and loving society?
I grew up going to church every Sunday, and then that was when we used to live in the city, and then when we moved to the suburbs, we found a church, and we also found a Filipino religious community called CFC. And so I grew up, doing that. I became a leader in youth groups. I led retreats. I led meetings. And so I was a very religious and faithful person, and I still am. And so going through that, I was immersed into the mentality of what it means to be Christian, what do Christians believe, and like what I should be reaching for. And so within that context of Christian religiosity comes the concept of what men and women, males and females, should act and be like. And that directly means how their gender expression should be like, and also what their sexuality should be like. So when I did start realizing my own sexuality, my own gender identity, and just starting to be aware of these concepts, it wasn't so much I was around oppressive people, I was around oppressive ideas, an oppressive system. So I didn't have an experience in which someone in the youth group that I was in or within a church come up to me and start spewing out hate or homophobic, genderphobic like words and stuff. And so in that respect, my experience is a little different because I know a lot of people who do experience more direct like hate. But I do think the feelings are very much the same. So I did start off with like having to do with like that internal conflict of, all right, this is who I am now. I identify as gay, but I also do identify as Catholic. So what do I do with that? And so that I don't want to speak for the majority or all of the queer religious people in the world, but I want to say that the experience has been similar in the sense that we come to a point where we're like, all right, what do I do? I feel like I have to abandon something. And that's hard because on the one hand, we found ourselves, we found our identities, who we are in these communities, in which I mean the religious communities, and we found people we care for and people who care for us. So what do we do with that? Do we just leave it off and follow this other identity that we've just found, or do we drop that one off? And I think for me, I had done both in a sense. I had dropped the one because I knew the religious identity a lot more, I was more comfortable. And so I thought, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna, I didn't think it was a phase, but it was definitely something I didn't want to deal with immediately, but I knew it was there. So that happened, and then you start realizing, you're like, okay, I'm starting to get these feelings for people, and you're like, this is too much, I can't leave it. So you start exploring both sides, but then you start kind of leaning towards more of the one, because you're starting to see that there's more of you in there, and then you start seeing there's a community outside of where you are, and you start finding the care and the love that you need for that identity. And funny enough, we find that community within that religious community as well. So for those people who, for the queer LGBTQ plus people within religious and specifically Catholic communities, we found each other in there. And we find love, and I think that's why we stay, because we find support and we find acceptance. That's not to say that the system is still oppressive. That's not to say that, we deal with people, whether that's family, friends, family, friends who may think differently, but knowing that we have a community within the first one we grew up in, that becomes more of it makes us stronger. I hate to use the word like whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but in a sense that does apply to a lot of us within religious communities, because we're constantly fighting, we're constantly dealing with people who disagree with us. Whether it's like Sunday church, whether it's you're going to, I went to Loyola University, so I was around religious people all the time, and lucky enough for me, I had people who accepted me and were, had a very similar thought process. But you do deal with a lot of like professors or people from like different parts of the country or even different parts of the world that do not understand anything about who you are, and let's just say their eyes don't exactly look at you in a very loving way. But but the experience has been, it's both tough, but it's something that we can't leave behind because it's so much of who we are. And to drop it like that would be just like dropping our queer gender identities. So, yeah.
The policing of women's bodies is one of the main means of asserting moral superiority. Young women face numerous restrictions on their autonomy, mobility, and personal decision-making. As a Filipino woman, what expectations have you seen or experienced that contribute to this respectable role mentality?
Because I'm half Filipino, my dad is Filipino, and my mom's family is from Algeria, and it's like a white colony in northern Africa, and so I am definitely white passing, and whenever someone finds out that I'm Filipino, they're kind of like really, really surprised, or like I just get like, what kind of Asian are you? And I'm just like, thank you, I think. So I feel my dad passed away when I was 13 years old, and so when that happened, my Filipino side of the family kind of brushed us off in a way, just because we're a lot more white from them, and they were kind of just like wanted to be like, you're not really in our culture, like you don't really understand, and so it hurt a lot. And so getting older now, I'm like trying to kind of like find that part of myself and like almost like shake it out of them, being like, what is this food? Like, just tell me. And so they definitely they treat us different because I'm like not exactly like them, and I feel like they definitely want to be so formal and American and wear like ties all the time, and then if I'm like going out with like out a bra or something, they're just like, what? And I'm like, I promise, people used to do this in the Philippines, guys. Like, yeah, I'm like sticking to it. So I think being a woman, being a Filipino woman, has affected me in the sense that people assume what I'm supposed to look like and how I'm supposed to act, and if I act too out of place, then I'm called a bitch or something. If I wear pants instead of a dress to like formal occasions, like I'm not dressed up enough, or I have a lot of my family members are just like, so when are you gonna grow your hair back? And I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that having hair makes me look more like a woman, or that I need to look more like a woman at all. So I think that definitely being a woman is very specific to every woman. Some of us do get harassed, some of us don't get harassed, some are catcalled, and then others watch their friends get catcalled and kind of just like shoo your friends away. So to be specific about being a woman, I feel like is very specific to me personally. And if I were to say like, I'm catcalled, I've been stalked, and it's scary, and even I try to never use the excuse of like, oh, I'm like in a relationship, just because I feel like that almost is like an excuse and makes it sound like just because I'm a woman means that I can't say no to you. I have to be like, no, I have a partner, like, don't talk to me, It's just like, no, like, I'm not interested in you, don't talk to me, So I think being a woman is really hard, and a lot of people brush over it because it's such a common conversation about how women go through a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that you're listening to us, and it doesn't mean that you're acting out to try and help us at all, and trying to sit down with us and say, well, just don't dress like that if you don't want to be catcalled. No, I'm going to dress how I want to dress. If I don't want to wear a bra, you're going to see my nipples. sorry, we all have them, you know? But I think being a woman makes me feel stronger because I have to look out for myself.
Trans visibility has become more mainstream with the bathroom laws that were passed in North Carolina, and more recently the election of the first trans woman into the Philippine Congress. As trans visibility furthers, how do you think we as a community can educate those who are unfamiliar with the concept?
You know, like, how do we talk about visibility when visibility for trans people has always been such a hard thing and also such a dangerous thing? How do we talk about transgender visibility without causing harm or danger to those who are already visible? And you know, there are a lot of, there was the recent, you know, hashtags of like Trans Day Visibility, to which I had a lot of friends who were posting, you know, like selfies and good photos of themselves on social media platforms, really sharing like what it felt like to be trans and like what it also meant to be visible and like how those things can like mesh together and create something really beautiful, but also how those things can mesh together and create really awful situations in which you are visible not only to the world, but to your parents, to your friends, to your workplace. You know, I have met a lot of people online who are struggling financially to barely even be able to move out of their parents' house because it's such an abusive household. And so I think when it comes down to transgender visibility, I think it becomes less so about like us as like a queer demographic of people being visible and more about the stigma and like that stigma and why it's so out there and why it needs to be talked about more. It's kind of the sense of like, you don't really need to, or we don't really need to talk to, we shouldn't really need to have to talk about ourselves, and in order for you to recognize us, you should have to be able to talk about the stigma and be able to fix it on your end, as opposed to for us causing harm to ourselves in order to better our brothers and our sisters and our siblings.
Although traditional notions of gender have been enforced through colonialism, concepts of gender identity have existed since ancient times. The linguingo of the Philippines and related iconography found in Indonesia share many themes with relation to gender as well as fertility, prestige, and trans identity. How have people, cis or trans, used objects/culture to help them navigate gender in the past and now?
All right, so I'm a Filipino American who grew up in a small town in Tennessee. Needless to say, I endured a lot of discrimination, name calling just because of my ethnicity and my identity. And when I would go home, incidentally, my mom married this guy who was a Marine, mestizo in the Filipino community, is very revered type of Filipino. And he was the stereotypical Marine. I didn't live up to his expectations of what it is to be a masculine man. I went through a lot of physical abuse from him, and I had to take it upon myself to remove myself from the situation. And so I ran away from home and lived in a homeless shelter for a period of a year. During this time, I pursued education as a means to to have a better life and to get myself out of where I was. And through my research and my education, focusing on the Philippines and pre-colonial times and how gender was viewed, I learned that duality of gender was very important in the early cosmological belief systems of the Philippines. So similar to the concept of yin and yang, male and female attributes were integral as a means to signify power and status. And so in early Philippines and even Indonesia, there are a lot of examples of transgender ritual specialists who performed on behalf of their communities, interceding to commune with the gods through their body and identities. I found that ritual objects were also used in the Philippines and Indonesia, and are thought to represent this importance of synergy between male and female attributes. And so in the Philippines, you have examples of the linglingo, which Jericho just mentioned, which is thought to represent the female or the stylized female vagina. And in the Igorot or Cordillera regions, it is also paired with the bawisak, which is a male testes. And so this synergy helps to validate the importance of not only male and female, but also how they can coexist together and give normative space for transgender or non-binary people. And so these objects helped me to find peace with myself, that I didn't have to fit in with this Western notion of masculinity, that my culture, my pre-colonial indigenous self already gave me a space. And so through this homage or honoring of my ancestors who support me as who I am, I feel at peace today.
Under the colonial reign of both Spain and the United States, the Philippines went through drastic cultural shifts. Rigid gender roles within the Philippines can be attributed with Spanish ideals of machismo and miranismo. What effects of colonialism can still be seen within the Filipinx community in regards to gender?
I ended up also joining the Navy after high school, and my last duty station was in Spain. And then I got out after 7 years and came here to Chicago to be an artist. And I say that because I think my life has taken me to these places where, to live in these places, the US included, of these colonial powers that have had so much influence on the Philippines. And where am I going with that? With regards to gender, what I notice is there's kind of like these delineations and different levels of interpretation where you can see how Filipino culture has adopted a lot of these kind of normative modes of masculine and feminine from Spanish culture, and then, but more specifically and closer to my experience with the American colonialism, neocolonialism, and even present influence of the US as a world power in the Philippines. A lot of it is reflected in the economy and in the labor divisions. Women do this, men do this, women inside the house or in the home or in a hospital, and men working manual jobs, cleaning boats, cruise ships all around the world, or in the Navy, or in the armed forces. So there's definitely this delineation of labor with regards to men and women, Filipino. And in the queer Filipino community, it's hard for me to really speak to that because I haven't really met a lot of Filipino queer people. I'm just now meeting all of you. And that is such a blessing, and I think really is coming at the right time and at this point where I myself have begun to piece these things together of living in the Philippines, being an American adoptee and a veteran, and kind of understanding how these colonial forces have worked in the past and how they influence our lives today. And it's a lot. It's hard to parse those things out, but they are definitely very present. But not just present, because I think understanding it, we and I am able to resist it and to recreate new ways of understanding it and to reforming what it means to be masculine, to be feminine, to be both, and all of it.
I remember being a leaf. I remember being a flame.